I know it's not often that I do content outside of survival horror, but I do branch out every now and then. If you go farther back on my channel, then you'll see that I did some content on Final Fantasy and hell, even Kingdom Hearts. See, there are not many franchises that I cover on this channel outside of survival horror, but the ones that I do, I'm extremely passionate about. And the Marvel Spider-Man series is just another one of those fantastic franchises that I absolutely love. So I figured now it's been over a month since Marvel Spider-Man 2 released that it would make perfect sense to finally cover some content on the game. And today's video, we're taking a look at the best fights in the game as I rank each of them from worst to best. Oh, and by the way, we're only looking at the 10 supervillain boss fights, not those super powered mini boss enemies in the game. Got it? Good. But before I do that, there are two things that I want to say. Firstly, as always, if you haven't already, please be sure to hit that subscribe button and that like button. Finally, this video is going to have a lot of spoilers for Spider-Man 2. I wanted to try to make it a spoiler-free video, but honestly, with some of the big reveals for some of these Spider-Man villains, there was really no way to avoid spoilers here. So if you haven't finished the game yet, and I mean completely finished, including some of the side quests, then you might want to go and do that first before watching this one. Otherwise, my name is Ruben with Nerd Space Games, and this is my top 10 best boss fights in Marvel Spider-Man 2. Let's get it. Number 10, Miles vs. Mysterio.
Beck. The name is... The name is... Mysterio.
So Mysterio is actually a boss fight that you don't get the opportunity to experience until you complete one of the side quest lines in the game, the Mysteriums. The quest line challenges the players to swing around New York City and complete Mysterio's challenges. While you are given the opportunity to face off against Mysterio a few times in this quest line, the main boss fight isn't until the very end after you completed every single Mysterium in New York City. With that being said, other than it being a little flashy and having some cool animation, the fight itself is kind of boring despite what you might have expected from a villain like Mysterio. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't think this is a bad boss fight. As a matter of fact, I'll go as far as saying that I think every single boss fight in this game is actually pretty cool and unique from each other. But when you compare it to others in the game, then you can easily see why this one falls short and ends up on the bottom of the list. It doesn't have any emotional stakes at all, as you would have guessed from a side quest like this. The plot of the storyline up until this point is pretty predictable. And while the fight itself is one of the more creative ones, the difficulty level of the fight just brings down the adrenaline of the experience, unlike most of the fights in the game. Still, it's a really fun and exciting experience, and seeing that this is the lowest entry on the list just showcases how amazing this game is when it comes to the boss fights. Number 9, Peter vs. Wraith.
God, that's beautiful.
So we move over to yet another boss fight that you wouldn't know anything about unless you completed another one of the side quest storylines. More specifically, you get the opportunity to face off against this boss when completing the Flame quest line, which honestly is probably the most important side quest line in the game, as it really sets up the future of the franchise with huge ramifications. But just in case you haven't finished the Flame yet, I'm going to hold off on the ending spoilers of this quest line. I am, however, going to talk about one spoiler, and that is regarding the Wraith herself. So if you are a huge comic book fan, then it really shouldn't shock you as to who the Wraith is. But at the beginning of the quest line, we learned that she is none other than the ex-chief of police, Yuri.
So what's your deal?
There you are.
Hey!
You never did like my smoking.
Yuri?
Lowlifes call me Wraith.
Now a vigilante herself, but just a little more vicious than Spider-Man, Yuri starts off the Flame questline working alongside Peter to stop a religious cult from carrying out an event known as the Crimson Hour. Later in the questline, Peter starts realizing that Yuri is obsessed with stopping the Flame at all costs because of her history with him, and is even willing to go the route of murder to stop this cult. Considering that Peter Parker is our perfect little Boy Scout, it shouldn't be too surprising that he views killing someone, even a mass murderer, is a step too far, thus causing Yuri to face off against Peter.
Stop! The fool's beacon himself!
as I prophesied! No!
I knew you had it in you, Yuri.
There. That'll keep pressure on it until I can...
Wraith is definitely one of the more challenging boss encounters in the game. With her weapons being a perfect match against Peter's spider sense abilities, defeating her is no easy task at all. With that being said, if we're looking at the entertainment value, then it's nowhere near as cinematic or story building as most of the other boss fights in the game. I mean, honestly, we all kind of saw this coming from the very first flame mission. And while her arsenal is definitely going to keep you, the player, on your toes, the fact is that it's not very flashy or cinematic. The only thing it does have going for it is the emotion between both characters, as they had a strong relationship going into this game.
You need to figure out your priorities. Because I'd rather lose sleep over the one person I killed than all the ones I didn't save.
Number 8, Peter versus Kraven.
I'm assured that material is unbreakable. But I believe anything can be broken.
Despite Venom being the main focus behind the initial trailers and teasers for Spider-Man 2, the game takes a lot of time building up the final showdown between Spider-Man and Kraven the Hunter.
You have hunted me. This is good.
Between Kraven hunting down and killing multiple supervillains to him almost killing Peter, the rivalry between these two characters were built up from the moment Kraven arrived in New York City. So of course, most of us comic book fans that love Kraven the Hunter were really anticipating the ultimate showdown between the two. And while it was definitely a challenging experience, the fight itself doesn't stand up against his other big fight in the game. Kraven does have a ton of abilities at his disposal, and you can definitely tell thanks to his experience that the man is a true hunter. He's extremely clever and resourceful. The man knows how to do his research and locate his prey's weakness. One cool element to the final section of this fight is how he uses the nearby bell to weaken your abilities, making you easy prey. In this situation, you're forced to web up the bell to stop it from ringing, as it makes Peter weaker. This moment is also one of the highest points of the symbiote's control over Peter, therefore we get to see a much darker and violent Peter Parker than we have ever seen before. So while Kraven's fight isn't as flashy or as big as we would have hoped, having a much more vicious Peter Parker definitely raised the stakes for how far Peter was going to go in order to stop Kraven. And this fight did set up one of the coolest fights in the game, but we'll get to that later on.
But you still hold back. Kill or be killed.
Number 7, Peter versus Lizard.
Hey, Doc. Ready for your annual physical?
Dr. Connors is a fight that I was highly anticipating ever since the gameplay reveal. Seeing that they were going to go the direction of a more savage and large creature versus the smaller form of Lizard had me pretty excited. And I gotta say, the fight definitely delivered. Lizard was massive, much bigger than I expected. Not only was the fight itself challenging and exciting to play, but the character development throughout the fight was incredible too. Watching Peter slowly give in more and more into his more aggressive emotions was thrilling and terrifying to watch at the very same time. All the while, the stakes of the fight were huge, considering that Dr. Connors was the only person in the world that can potentially help save Harry's life. This meant that despite how aggressive the symbiote made Peter, we still saw him trying to manage his emotions for the benefit of his best friend. While not to the levels of the late game boss fights, this fight was pretty challenging too, as it introduced some unique, fast, and powerful attacks that kept the player on their toes and forced them to react quickly with the right type of counterattack. Between the design of Lizard, the lead up to the fight itself as Peter tracks Dr. Connors down, and the combination of the stakes and the transition of Peter's emotional state throughout the fight makes for one of the cooler experiences in the game.
Time for your medicine.
Number Number 6, Peter vs. Scream. Scream is definitely one of the more surprising boss fights in Spider-Man 2. I don't think most of us saw this coming, or maybe it was just me. Anyway, the big shock here was that Venom turned MJ into Scream, a female symbiote that was ready to take names and kick ass. This was probably one of the more shocking moments for me in the game, as I didn't expect Scream to be in the game, let alone for it to be MJ. Perhaps that's why I ranked this fight so high. What's really cool about this fight is that it takes the reverse route of the first Kraven boss fight. In that fight, we saw Kraven the Hunter use a bell to weaken Peter's symbiote. This time, as Peter Parker now, we're trying to use the environments and spider gadgets to our own advantage to weaken Scream. What's crazy about this boss fight is that it actually is a much longer fight than most of the ones in the game. The face-off between Peter and MJ is 4 phases long. That's insane. That's the same amount as the Venom fight at the end of the game. While they are pretty similar to each other, but with different environments, the fight itself had a lot of stakes and was emotional as hell. Just like how the symbiote focused on Peter's negative emotions relating to his frustration as Spider-Man and protecting New York City, the symbiote on MJ focused on her negative emotions of being in Spider-Man's shadow and giving up everything she cared about for Peter.
Remember your book? You said you want to help people!
Nobody read it! Nobody cares! That's not true! If I helped one person, it was worth it!
Watching MJ and Peter fight while also battling through the deep emotions hidden within MJ was one of the most dramatic moments and intense moments in Marvel Spider-Man 2. Number 5, Miles vs. Mr. Negative.
So how many people did you kill before I got here?
I didn't have a choice. You always have a choice.
There were multiple themes surrounding the story of Spider-Man 2, but one of the biggest and most impactful themes focused on second chances. In this game, instead of seeing the big bad evil supervillains, we kept getting glimpses of villains being reformed and doing good versus evil. For example, we saw Tombstone save someone from a terrible go-kart accident. We also see Mysterio starting his own business and helping people live out their dreams and simulations, although that goes very wrong. And though briefly and only discovered if you complete the side quests relating to him, even Sandman was reviewed to have only caused trouble thanks to the manipulation of Kraven threatening his daughter. However, the biggest redemption moment goes to Martin Lee. If you don't remember, Martin Lee was the main villain of the first half of Marvel's Spider-Man. In that half, Lee is responsible for multiple people dying, including Jefferson Davis, a cop and father to Miles Morales. So obviously, one of the more emotional moments in Spider-Man 2 is when Lee and Miles face off for the first time since Jefferson Davis was killed. This was a big moment for Miles, as it was the ultimate test for him to face. Up until this point, all Miles could think of was going after Lee no matter what. So obviously, this was a fight that already had a lot of baggage and emotion attached to it even before it began. And with Lee's abilities, we got to see one of the coolest fight scenes in the game, as Miles had to use his own abilities to fight against Lee inside his own world. All the while, Lee slowly learned who Miles really was. The animations and visuals within Lee's world, the emotion behind the fight itself, the theme of second chances, and the challenging aspect of the fight thanks to Lee's resourceful attacks made this boss fight one of the more exciting in the game.
Do it. Please. When you're out, find Spider-Man.
Number 4, Peter and Miles vs. Sandman.
Marco! That's Sandman? MJ wasn't kidding. We gotta help him before he hurts someone or himself.
So this entry might surprise a lot of you guys. Sandman is the first official main boss fight in the game, so to rank it so far up on the list is kind of shocking even for me. But the thing is, the fight set the tone for the rest of the game, and it did so in a massive way. Switching back and forth between Miles and Peter as they battled a giant Sandman and his sand minions was impressive, exciting, and cinematic. Sure, the stakes are nowhere near a lot of the entries on this list, and the emotional impact of this fight isn't as big as a lot of entries on this list as well. But for me, this one ranks so high based on the cinematic experience throughout the fight itself. Similar to the fight with Kingpin in the first game, the first big bad did a great job at getting us hyped for the rest of the game. Even though it's pretty much a tutorial section of the game, fighting Sandman spans all across New York City. We see Miles and Peter getting launched miles away with his attacks and being forced to swing or glide back to the Sand Titan.
You okay?
I'm working on it!
Sure, the fight is not at all that difficult considering that it's the tutorial section for the game, but I still love every moment of it. Watching Miles and Peter team up and perform combo attacks to bring Sandman down was exciting to watch and got me extremely hyped. Do I think it's the best fight in the game? Absolutely not, but I do think it's more unique than most of the fights, and it definitely cracks the top 5 territory at the very least. Number 3, Venom vs. Kraven. As I mentioned earlier, there are 2 different Kraven fights in Marvel's Spider-Man. The first one was when Peter faced off against him with his symbiote suit. The second, though, is one of the cooler and more vicious fights in not just this game, but in any Marvel game. Venom vs. Kraven is fucking insane. As soon as Harry takes over the suit and becomes Venom, it's game over. He knocks Peter the fuck out and then ultimately finds himself facing off against Kraven. Well, let's just say that Kraven got exactly what he wanted. And I'll be completely honest, I didn't expect the fight to play out the way it did. I also didn't expect to get the opportunity to play as Venom. Like, what?
We are.
Anyway, Venom and Kraven face off right in the middle of Times Square. You get to use all of Venom's abilities to take him down. There are 2 reasons why this fight is ranked so high for me. The first reason being the fact that you get to play as Venom. Even if people may have guessed that we would get the opportunity to take control of Venom, I don't think any of us expected that it would be in this way and that we'll have a chance to take down Kraven with him. The combos that Venom can do combined with the difficulty of the fight and Kraven's resourceful abilities makes this moment intense. And unlike the last fight, it really is a fight of life and death. Which brings me to the second factor that helps elevate this entry on this list. The conclusion of the fight. It ends with Venom biting Kraven's head off. I would have never expected in a million years that 1, Kraven would have been killed in this game, and 2, that it would be Venom biting his head off. Venom's introduction was done perfectly in this scene. It immediately established how dangerous Venom was, and it was one of the most intense moments of the game. Number 2, Miles versus Venom Peter.
I need this suit. It makes me a better Spider-Man. You just want it for yourself.
Straight up, I argued with myself between putting this fight and the next one as the #1 best boss fight in the game. And I could easily see why people could go either way with this one. Ultimately, I landed at number 2 for Venom Peter versus Miles Morales. I love this moment in this game. It's one of my favorite moments in video games this year. Watching Miles, the apprentice to Peter Spider-Man, being the one that helped him escape from the symbiote was one of the coolest moments I've seen in any video game. And it's quite possible that in 2 to 3 years down the road, I might change my mind and lift this one up to the #1 spot. This fight had it all. The stakes of this fight were huge. A lot of us didn't know how this would go. Some of us, myself included, really believed that Venom in this game was going to be Peter Parker. There were so many teases to that being the case. The fact that Venom was never in any trailers except for the initial one. The fact that the developers refused to tell us who Venom was going into it despite the post-credit setting up Harry as Venom. The slow transition of Peter's voice matching that of Venom's voice. All of those elements really hinted to the fact that our very own Peter Parker was going to be Venom. And I'm not gonna lie, I thought this fight was going to end with Peter giving into the symbiote completely. So the stakes were high as hell here, and Miles was forced to fight his friend, his mentor, in order to save him. Watching the Spider-Man fight each other was incredible and tragic at the same time. Similar to the Scream versus Peter fight, Miles had to use the environment to his advantage in order to defeat Peter. The things that help elevate this so high up on this list include the emotion of the fight, the stakes involved, and the ultimate face-off of the century, Spider-Man versus Spider-Man.
Pete, come on, man. Just focus on me. Come on! We're stronger than this. You hear me?
Number 1, Peter and Miles versus Venom.
This is where we became best friends.
Yeah, it is.
And now it's where we become brothers.
I guess I want to start by saying that I'm including every single phase of the Venom boss fight as one entry, considering that they are pretty much back to back. This includes both Venom versus Peter and Venom versus Miles. But let's start with the first half of that fight, Peter versus Venom. If I was going to rank these separately, then I would probably put Peter versus Venom up a little bit higher than the Miles versus Venom fight, mainly for the mere fact that the relationship of Peter and Harry has more emotional stakes in the fight. The entire fight between the two is extremely tragic, as we learn from Dr. Connors that the only way to stop Harry is to kill him. The battle area is pretty iconic too, as it takes place at the high school that Peter and Harry graduated from. And thanks to Venom's abilities, you find yourself traversing to different areas on the map to avoid his symbiote that is taking over different sections of the fighting area. This fight is easily the most difficult in the game, while also being one of the more emotional fights. With the exception of the Sonic Boom gadget, most gadgets and webs don't work on Venom, and you're forced to use your abilities and the environment to weaken him so that you can damage him. Actually, prior to this fight, you get a new suit that resembles the symbiote's abilities, the anti-Venom suit, giving you access to your symbiote abilities again. In this fight, there are specific moments where you have to use these abilities against Venom in order to remove his shield. Now, Miles versus Venom is just as exciting, but just not as emotional or as difficult thanks to the abilities that Miles has. The big difference here is that the fight takes place in the Emily May Foundation building, and that Venom is, well, he's flying. While not as impactful as Peter versus Venom, this section of the final fight is emotional too, as you can see Harry's jealousy of Miles replacing him as Peter's best friend affects him and fueling his anger for Miles in that moment.
Peter doesn't need
Overall, it's hard to argue that any other fight is better than this one. It's tied for the longest fight with 4 phases. It is one of the most emotional fights, with it also having the highest stakes over any other fight in the game. It's definitely one of the coolest fights in the game, with each half giving an opportunity to let each of the Spider-Man shine. And from an animation and cinematic point of view, it's one of the coolest looking fights in not just this game, but any Spider-Man game ever. Honestly, when I think of the first game, it reminds me of how much that game fucked up a great build-up thanks to a bad final boss fight. This game does not make that same mistake, thankfully. But that does it for this episode of Nerd Space Games. Hit up the comments and let me know if you guys agree with my choice for best boss fight in Marvel Spider-Man 2. Do you agree that Venom takes the cake, or do you think another one deserves the #1 spot? Anyway, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe for more ranking videos like this one. Also, let me know in the comments if you guys like rankings on other content outside of survival horror. I plan on doing at least 2 or 3 more videos on the Spider-Man trilogy, but I kind of want to hear you guys out first. But thanks for tuning in, and as always, I'll catch you guys on the next episode of Nerd Space Games. Take care.